Hi there, welcome back, and this is a long awaited video, and in this series we are going to talk about PHP. Now before we start with PHP, let's go back and look at some basics before how to set up PHP or how to start running PHP. Now PHP is not like HTML. You can just start writing HTML and then test it in the browser. PHP is an application just like Java or any other programming language you have. That means it needs to be compiled before it can be used or run. HTML or JavaScript are all scripting languages. Hence, your JavaScript actually is a programming language, but still the browser can understand it. As opposed to CSS and HTML, which are markup languages, so that you don't need to actually compile it. So if you just use the browser to run it. So PHP or any other server-side scripting or programming languages, you need to have a server. Let's see basically what's the difference between these two. Now an HTTP server is a normal server, that a server which can transfer HTML files. So in a normal scenario, this is what happens. You have a browser. Let's say you have the internet connection and some server. Let's take an example of twitter.com, although Twitter is not done using PHP, but let's take it as an example over here. Now when you open the browser and you start typing in the address, let's say I'm typing twitter.com/index.html page. Now my request is propagated through the internet, finds out the server twitter.com, requests the page index.html. Now the index.html is actually stored as an HTML page on the server. So the main job of the server is to receive the request and just send that file that was requested. So I'm not doing anything. I'm not processing HTML. I'm just sending it back via the internet down to the browser. So hence, when the file comes to your browser, everything is displayed in a normal fashion without any execution happening. So it's a markup language. So whenever it comes back, the browser understands what to do with it, and it displays the page based on the styles or whatever markup you have in your page. And we saw that in detail when we were talking about HTML in the previous screencasts. Now what is the difference between an application server? An application server, you do the same scenario. You start with the browser, internet connection, and the server. You have another component which is known as the application server. Along with your web server or your HTTP server, you also have an application server. The scenario starts like this. Instead of requesting a normal HTML page, now I'm requesting a PHP page. PHP means that index.index file is written in a programming language and not in plain HTML. So I request that page, and this is propagated again through the internet, finds me the twitter.com server, and then requests an index.php page. Now when the server receives a request for a PHP page, it cannot just simply pick up the page from the directory and send it as we did with the HTML page. It needs to run it first. So it sends that page to a PHP server. It sends it to a PHP application server. This server receives the PHP page, runs it like a normal compiler or executes it, and then the output of this page is an HTML. So the output of this PHP page is rendered as an HTML page. When you get the output as an HTML page, this page is then sent to the server, sent to the application server, which then propagates it from itself and sends it to the browser that requested this page as an HTML page. Although you will see that it's written as a PHP page, but when you look at the source, you see that it's always an HTML page. So the browser can only understand HTML. That's why we send it as an HTML page. But you can request a PHP page, which makes it dynamic in nature. But that PHP page has to run at a server. So that's the basic difference. In order to program or run or test any server-side scripting language, you need to have an application server. Now that we know about what an application server is and why it is important for writing server-side scripting programs, let's see what are the different types of servers we have. There are two types of servers. We have a development server and we have a production server. Let's see what is the difference between these two. Let's first take an example of a production server. Suppose I'm a developer and I'm writing my PHP page, and we have the internet and we have the server. and this is a server that suppose belongs to me. I bought this domain and this ad and this server. You see those advertisements that you get online, the $9 for a server, or even Google sites, or many other sites which even provide you with a free space for some limited size. So let's say I bought this server, and the name of my server is myserver.com. It's an application server. As you can see that I have this main server and an application server box at the bottom. Okay, I'm just going to pause it for a little while. Okay, so let's go back again. So we have this scenario that we're talking about. Now suppose as a developer, I program my PHP file. I write it on my computer, and then I transfer it to my server. Usually this is done through a protocol called FTP. It's a file transfer protocol where you can send your files from your desktop or from your environment to the actual server through the internet. So I'm going to send my files, and that gets stored on my server. And then when I want to test it, or anyone else wants to request that file, he opens a browser and start typing the address. So www.myserver.com/index.php, and the whole scenario happens as we saw earlier. It goes to the server, it sends the index.php file to an application server, which compiles it and then renders it as an HTML page, and that page is sent again to my browser so that I can see the actual page. But in this environment, I'm using a production server. A production server is an actual server that is on the internet. Sometimes you don't have access to those, and it's very difficult to actually use it when you are developing something, because it takes a lot of time. When you develop your program, you need to, every time you develop a new page or update a page, you need to send it to the server and then test it again. So it takes a lot of time to do that. In order to avoid that situation, we have the development servers. Now, what is a development server? Suppose you are working on your computer, and you use a programming language like NetBeans or Aptana or any other that you feel comfortable with writing your programs. You write your programs using that. And then you have this cluster. I'm going to explain it to you in the next slide. These are your servers. You install that on your own computer. These are some of the good ones that we really know about. And then once you finish writing your PHP page, what you need to do is, although that arrow shows that you need to send it, it's just like copy pasting it to a folder. I'll show you in a little while what that folder is and why do we need it. So we just copy paste that folder, test.php file, into a folder on your server. Now that server is not actually a server on some other computer, it's on your own machine. That's why we have this PC or desktop showing there. So that means we are working on a single computer, not over the internet. And you don't need to be connected to the internet to actually test it, so it's good. You open your browser for testing the same way. You type, instead of typing the whole name of the server, you can actually use some term called localhost. Localhost is when you're referring to your own machine, which is now acting as a server. So you type localhost/test.php, the same page that I just programmed, and then the server will respond me back with the test.php page. Now it will not again send me the test.php page, it will run the PHP file, convert it into HTML, and then send me back the HTML page, because the browser again does not understand a PHP page. It understands only HTML. So this is how, and this reduces your timeline. It's just like copy pasting your file or saving that in that sense to a specific folder on your machine which belongs to the server. Now let's see what that folder is in a little while. So this is a much more feasible scenario, or an optimal scenario, where you can work on your development server, test your programs. Once your application is ready, then you transfer your whole application as a package onto the production server and telling that your website is launched. So that's how it goes. Now, the different types of development servers that we have based on the operating system you're using. You can use Linux, a Windows-based operating system, or Mac OS. If you're using a Linux-based operating system, you can install a server called XAMPP. And if you're using a Windows-based operating system, then you can install a server called XAMPP. And the other one, when you're using Apple Mac OS, you can install a server called XAMPP. You can see that the first letter of each of these servers actually represents the type of operating system you're using. L for Linux, W for Windows, and M for Mac. There is a server which is cross-platform. Cross-platform means it can work on any of the operating systems, be it Linux, Windows or Mac, and that's called XAMPP. X is like something that can be replaced by any of the digits. Okay, so this is something that if you don't want to care about which operating system you're using, you just want a general server so that you can use XAMPP. Now, all of these servers have some things in common, except for the first letter. These are the AMP. Now, what does AMP stand for? A stands for Apache, M stands for MySQL, and P stands for PHP or Python or Perl. Good thing they all start with P, so that's why we have AMP. Now, what is Apache? Apache is the web server. The web server, actually the HTTP server. MySQL is the database server. It's one of the languages that you use for writing your database. It's an open source database language, and it comes as packaged with your server. So that's whenever you request a query to be run, that can be run through your database server. And lastly, we have PHP, Python or Perl, which is your application server, the thing that we saw earlier. So all this thing, 3 servers packed into one, an application, a database and a web server packed into one thing, it's called AMP. And whatever depending upon whatever operating system you're using, you attach the first letter. So that's why you have LAMP, VAMP and MAMP. Now a cross-platform one, as I told you, is XAMPP, so we can use XAMPP. Sometimes if XAMPP doesn't work on your PC, but due to some reason that maybe the port is blocked by your, let's say, your antivirus or your firewall, you can always install a specific one. Sometimes that works too. Okay. Now let's see how we can set it up for our testing environment for the next coming screencast. We saw that we can download and set up XAMPP. XAMPP usually comes in 2 flavors. We have a fully working version and a portable version. The difference between these 2 versions is simple. If you're using XAMPP, it just provides you with PHP, MySQL and PHP, or even, let's say, any other programming language like Perl or Python. Apart from that, it also provides you with a mail server, and this mail server is Mercury Mail. That means it now accepts and provides you with SMTP and POP3 access. And then also it provides you with a file server. So that means it actually allows you to upload and download files from another machine, making your server act as an FTP server. Okay. Apart from that, if you're just working on your environment for only programming your application, testing it on your database and your application, you don't need the mail and the FTP servers. You can simply need the portable version, which is much more smaller and easier to use. So for this screencast and this series of screencasts on PHP, I'm going to use Apache's XAMPP portable server. Now how do we do that? We have this link. We can go to this link and start downloading them. Let me go to the browser for you. This is the XAMPP folder. If you go back, let me go back to the top and start from this is the download button on your Apache Friends website. You go there, you can see that XAMPP is for different platforms: Windows, Linux and Apple. We can select Windows because I'm going to say more downloads because I'm going to show you that I'm going to go for XAMPP Windows. I'm going to show you that the different versions where you can download and set up the different versions. As you can see, the latest version is 1.8.3. So once I'm in here, you can see that each of this version, they have these 2 Win32, which is the full version, installer, zip file, whatever you need, or you can also have the portable version, which is over here. Now for this case, I'm downloading the portable version, although the full version is the most common one. I would just like to have the portable version. Now in the portable version is no installer. I mean, you just need to unzip it and then start running it. So I downloaded this version, and to set it up, I opened my D drive. Usually it's much better if you do it in the other drive that you have, not the main operating system drive, so that even if you have an antivirus, it will not stop you from running that program. But sometimes even if you do that, or suppose you have just one drive and it stops you from running it, you can always install other specific ones, which is like WAMP or LAMP based upon your operating system you have. Now suppose that whenever you install it, this is the zip file that was downloaded. I extracted it into this folder, which is XAMPP, and when double click on it, you see that I have a list of a lot of files on this. We don't need to know any one of them. What we need to care about is a few things. The first important part is these executable files, these application files. Now these are files that you need to start and stop your server. Whenever you do this, that means your application now your computer now acts as a server as well. That means it can start receiving applications, it can start running your PHP files and then giving you an output. And the next one is this folder called htdocs. Now htdocs is the main folder. It's like the root folder of your website. So whatever you put inside this folder will be the one that you can access from your browser. These all other folders are not that important. This is the main folder. So whatever you put on over here is the root directory. So for example, whenever I put localhost, it will send me this index.php or this index.html page. Okay, let's see that. Let's say, for example, I'm going to open this. I'm going to open the control to start my server. Just double click on it, and then you will see this box where you can, although my servers are still running, I'm just going to stop that for you so that you can understand. So you can see that I have these things that I can run from my server. We have the Apache server, we have the MySQL server, the database server. FileZilla and Mercury are actually disabled because I installed the portable version. If you install the full version, you can see them activated as well. Because I just need these two, I'm just going to use these two. So if you start Apache, it starts the web server as well as the application server. So I'm going to start that. As you can see that it now listens to a port called 80. The port 80 is the HTTP protocol port. That means it's listening to requests coming from your browser. And then 443 is a security SSL port that I'm listening to. Apart from that, if you're working with databases, you can also start MySQL, and that will also listen on a different port other than the one that we're working with. Okay, so that's 3306. So now my server is working. Let me show you what happens if my servers are not working. We stop all of them, and then now let's go back to localhost. I'm going to localhost. As I told you that it starts with localhost. This is the IP address. This is the IP address of your own system, the local system that you're working with. So suppose I start localhost, and you can see that I get an error because localhost is not a server anymore because there is no server started on it. In that case, let me start my server, and then when I just started and then I press localhost, you can see I get something different. Now this is coming from my localhost. And where is this file stored? Where is this file stored? This is the folder I talked about earlier, htdocs, and this is the folder. Now suppose, for example, I have something called test. I'm not going to use that. Okay, let's do something very simple and then check how it works, like if it's working, suppose it's working or not. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to create a new file. So I'm going to open the application that I'm going to use throughout the course called Aptana. Aptana is a very good application for programming your server-side scripts. Although we use brackets for our previous lectures, but brackets are very good for front-end development. It doesn't provide much support for back-end development. Aptana is used specifically for PHP. It's good support for frameworks, autocomplete features, and many other features. So if you are working with server-side languages, I'd prefer that you use Aptana for it. Now suppose I'm going to say file, new. I'm just going to create a new file. Let's say I'm going to create it in this project, and then let me call that file, let's say test.php. Okay, now in that file I'm going to write a small code of PHP. Just, you didn't need to understand the code for now, but it's very simple. I'm going to talk about this in the next screencast. I'm going to use the hello world example, and then I'm going to close that. Now what this program does is just displays hello world. Now you can see that I saved this inside this project, which is actually stored in my htdocs, this folder, PHP loop and conditions. And it's stored over here as test.php, the one that I just saved. Now if I run it on my machine, localhost / now first I need to put the name of my folder, which is php loop and conditions, and then slash. So you see the root directory is my htdocs, and then whatever you have inside it and subdirectories, you have to put the name of that subdirectory and then the name of the file. If you're using index.php, you don't need to write PHP because by default it searches for index.php. So if you have any other file name that you need to use, you need to type that name in your browser. And it's test.php, and you see hello world. This is what my program actually was about. So this is how you can set up an application server on your system, which becomes your development server to test your applications. So before you come to the next screencast, before you see how to use or how to program using PHP, I advise you to actually go through this, install it, set it up, make sure it's running perfectly, and then so that we can continue smoothly with the remaining screencasts. Okay, that's it.